So I will just, before I say something about me, I will just start. I'm not sure about if this is exactly true, but what one can expect that this is more or less the case. If you talk about architecture and building, I mean, most stuff is already in place. And a lot of things which we work on in the new stuff is just the kind of top of the iceberg. So I think that's just kind of good to have that in mind. And especially now when we're talking about, let's say, craft and digitization. So, I mean, I should also say that I'm not a craft person, nor I'm, especially, skilled in, all the kind of digital tools besides, the ordinary. But this is just a kind of the starting point. So with that said, I'm based in Gothenburg, the city where Chalmers is located, but also Gothenburg University. And again, just to remind us that, what's already there is the kind of 99%. And it will continue to be 90% more or less. And there's a small hole in the left corner, which is white, which is, of course, the other 1%, which is quite a lot of focus around, of course. So a lot of my work is about this relation. So the future city, which is just a tiny, tiny part, built on top of the kind of existing city. So that kind of dynamics or relation, or even a similar, asymmetric relation, I think this is really interesting, but also, it's quite easy to forget. There is a kind of focus, of course, on the new and what will come, and a lot of things which is already just left out of sight. Yeah, it speaks for itself. So this is where I'm based now. There's a small arrow on the right side. I have an office there together with Onka Kular, which I will talk more about later. It's actually a school built for craft education in 1904. It was called Slöjdföreningsskolan, but it's actually been a school for design and craft, ever since. And one project which I won't talk about here is about the fact that we HDK, as it was called, and now HDK Valand and Academy of Art and Design have merged with other departments within the university and will also relocate in the near future, leaving this building. But just a kind of quick map, where I speak from, so to say. As Anna said, I have, strong connection to Chalmers. Historically, I was educated there. I also worked there occasionally with research and also with teaching. Carl Gunnar, which I saw here, we did some kind of master programs, I think around 2000 or something. But I also had a kind of postdoc position there within the Center for Healthcare Architecture. So, and I've been kind of moving in between Gothenburg University and Chalmers quite a lot, different positions, but also quite a lot all over the university. So I have a kind of mixed background, and I seem to be drawn to, context where, people don't share my own background. For instance, the Center for Critical Heritage Studies, where I've been involved for, I think, the past 5 or 6 years. And still, I wouldn't call myself a kind of heritage scholar. I mean, I'm interested in, time and space and materiality, what happens over time. So I think it's been really enlightening for me to work in that kind of context. I've also been involved in the more kind of strategic development of arts and design and crafts to different kind of leadership role, and now as deputy dean. And all these things somehow, are entangled. And the bottom line for me, that question is about the role of university and the role of education. What is research? What is the inside and outside academy? How does knowledge exchange happen, and so forth and so forth. And so I picked up these things both as a kind of educator and researcher, but also in terms of, if you say so, management position. Because I mean, as we all know, project like the one you're attending and, you know, being part of the institution, there's also quite a lot of machinery and quite a lot of kind of plumbing, I would say, to, you know, actually make things work, which you don't really realize from the outside. So, and the kind of combination of these kind of insights produced to, you know, what we can do through education, what we can do to research, and how, let's say, an organization or projects enable or disable exchange or development. I mean, that's a kind of ongoing challenge and question for me. I don't need to say, as said, I mean, I have my background in architecture, and I mean, also in terms of education, I sometimes refer, especially, I mean, your basic degree, it is a kind of trauma, because you enter an education and you do learn a mindset and a set of skills, and you start practice them, and at some point you actually, you know, forget, you know, how you embody these kind of visions or ideas of how to work, and you just do it. So you kind of lose track of, you know, what is you and what is my kind of professional training. And I think that's also kind of good exercise. And for me, the PhD perhaps, and also being engaged with other scholars, this is why actually seeing, you know, what are the tools, you know, and how do I embody it, but also how can I kind of redirect those tools, you know, for what purpose and so forth. But as anybody, I'm sure, I mean, I do get inspired and I do get, you know, ideas from others. So you read stuff and you do stuff and you pick up ideas and you start building new stuff with them, or, you know, drawing things out of them. So I will just tie back some, you know, influential work, which has really been, you know, informing the way I've been, you know, let's say been working the last 10 or so, 10 or 15 years, more or less, or ideas, one could say. So one comes from this curator. She used to be based in Stockholm, in Tensta Konsthall, but she's quite nationally renowned curator, Maria Lind. And she has been having this, and she's not, of course, the only one, but, you know, a notion of curating and more so the curatorial. So curating is, as you know, it is, you know, the production of exhibitions, one could say. But she extends that notion, and, you know, drawing a bit on Chantal Mouffe, you know, the change from politics to political. She imagines the curatorial as, you know, a curating activity, but it happens in relation to an outside as well, with other materials. It's really about, you know, building new knowledge out of existing knowledge, and connecting people is a very kind of situated way of looking at knowledge production. I could read it out, but part of the screen is actually, if I can minimize that, there. Is there something we could call the curatorial? A way of linking objects, images, processes, people, locations, histories, and discourses in physical space. And endeavor that encourages you to start from the artwork, but not to stay there, to think with it, but also away from it and against it. I believe so, and I imagine this mode of curating to operate like an active catalyst, generating twists, turns, and tensions, owing much to site-specific and context-sensitive practices, and even more to various traditions of institutional critique. The curatorial would thus parallel to Chantal Mouffe's notion of the political, an aspect of life that cannot be separated from divergence and dissent, a set of practices that disturbs existing power relations. At its best, the curatorial is a viral presence that strives to create friction, push new ideas, whether from curators, artists, or educators or editors. So this mindset, you know, not being a curator and not being, you know, at the art state as such, but, you know, as a designer architect, has really kind of inspired me and the work I've been doing, which we'll come to. Okay. And this is also the work I've been doing with the Center for Critical Heritage Studies. Of course, you see it in the title, but it was also, I was asked at one point, you know, not being connected to heritage at all, but having been worked with various participatory processes and knowledge making. So would you be interesting to participate in the forming of this center? And said, why not? I don't know much about heritage, but it sounded like a kind of interesting challenge. And the mission we got in our labs was to deal with something which then was kind of called urban heritage or urban renewal, which for me didn't sound really was what I was interested in. And also it was a question of me being based at the Academy of Arts and Design, so not where, the education we have there is not architecture or planning, but rather small scale design or arts and crafts, and a quite different approach in a way. And we felt also a need to kind of rephrase what we are doing and to open up what we could do. So at some point we just renamed, and we were separated into research cluster to something called Curating the City, which really is about the kind of adopting the attitude, which I was described earlier within the setting as a kind of knowledge making, very situated, but also based on what's actually there and connecting people and stories and materialities in new ways. And it's been quite productive just to change the title or the name of these things. It has opened up and it has created interest. I think those kind of things are really crucial, and I will touch upon the notion of orientation earlier. But naming and framing is actually quite an important exercise, because it also allows different forms of readership or interpretations depending on where you put yourself. It's quite obvious, but I think it's quite crucial or important tool to work with, whatever you do. And there you see some of my colleagues. Some are based in Gothenburg and some at University College London. But there are a lot of people around this work as well. So one of the things we did early on, it was back then it was me, Ingrid Martin Solberg, and a couple of postdocs, was to set up a kind of experimental seminar series, partly because we weren't sure about the notion of heritage ourselves, and we also wanted to expand that. And this is almost like not 10 years, but almost. So commons, of course, been a quite big discussion, digital commons and physical commons, and the right to citizens. And we just wanted to explore those kind of relations, but we also wanted to explore it in a kind of transdisciplinary way, engaging not only scholars but artists or planners. So we set up this kind of experimental seminars, with quite different viewpoints, and where we first invited one person who in turn was asked to, invite a guest who had, who they would like to discuss these things with. And this ended up in a kind of a publication with short essays grouped around the seminars as a kind of explorative work. We also did similar work around the university and the role of university as a kind of producer of heritage or gatekeeper of heritage, and also quite an important actor when it comes to urban development over time. And this was also partly based on the collaboration in between UCL and Gothenburg University, but it also involved universities in Italy, in Roma 3, and in Lund in Sweden, and American University in Palestine. And we are in the process of finalizing a book on UCL Press, so hopefully it will be out later this year. I did a chapter on the building I showed you in the second picture around Vuodekovalan, and how the relation of design education has changed, relation to the city has changed throughout time in relation to the merging in university and inter-university mergers, and changes in national and regional policies, and so forth and so forth. We've also been running these kind of extensive workshops, which again picks up this site specificness. with the focus on heritage sites as a kind of a forgotten resource, or what, basically what could we learn, from these kind of heritage sites in terms of imagining other ways of, thinking about the future, or in terms of practices or orientations and so forth. So we've been around, and I will show some clips from the second one, Eskult, and we are now working with two, one in Chiswick House in London and one in Limegården. But this again has been about drawing together scholars with activists, with practitioners and so forth, and people, caring for these places, or politicians as well. So just staying in this kind of, multi and transdisciplinary settings where, things can be brought to the table. And another important influence is Arjun Appadurai, is a Indian sociologist, but I mean, he's based in the States since the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, even more. But I mean, he's a kind of scholar of globalizations and the impacts of globalization. And this is a quote from a paper called The Right to Research. So, research is normally seen as a high-end technical activity, available with training and class background to specialists in education, the sciences and related professional fields. It is rarely seen as a capacity with democratic potential, much less belonging to the family of rights. In this paper, I will argue that it's worth regarding research as a right, albeit of a special kind. This argument requires us to recognize that research is a specialized name for generalized capacity, the capacity to make disciplined inquiries into those things we need to know, but do not know yet. All human beings are, in this sense, researchers. Since all human beings make decisions that require them to make systematic forays beyond their current knowledge horizons. So that is kind of quite strong statement, which has inspired me, and especially also, I mean, Onka Kular. So we just kind of piggybacked, or asked ourselves, what would happen if we just change the word of research to design? And I mean, and that has been a kind of exercise we've been going on with in various ways for a couple of years now. So we set up, based on that kind of, linking or way of reading design, we set up this research platform. The Right to Design is a practice-based platform, which one, positions design more broadly and beyond its institutional settings. Two, interrogates design within and the relation to different rights, for instance, human rights or commercial. And through a transdisciplinary framework, three, reimagining design through an intersectional and decolonial lens as a form of literacy, crucial for decoding, navigating, and acting upon social, cultural, and political spheres and issues as individuals and as well as collectives. Engendered by a one-to-one methodology, the platform serves as a base for public outreach, such as assemblies, methodologies, such as misreading, publications, and educational work with partners outside academia. So one of the first things we actually did within this work was we used Arjun Appadurai's paper, and we just worked it through and replaced research with design wherever we could, and started to think about the implications of placing design in the same kind of framework. And so there is a kind of a performance lecture, which we did it with the platform artistic research, PARS as it's called. This one of the publication run by the Faculty of Arts where I'm also located. I can send you the link afterwards. So it's kind of a lecture basically where we work our way through the paper, but piggybacking it and using the word of design and asking question backs to how, what are the implications for design if we read it in this way. It also includes, and this has been endlessly postponed, we set out to do a kind of public mapping, again, mapping the issue and the relation between design and rights. This was partly done into exhibition with forensic architecture at Röhsska Museet. But I mean, this was all planned for, you see, 2020. So, and it was postponed and didn't happen then due to COVID and everything. But the plan is to do something now in October. And the good thing is that we actually got signed up Arjen Appadurai to contribute to the conversation. So this is fantastic. So the delay brought good things as well. But this is again kind of in a way similar as the kind of Eden Sites workshop, the way of drawing things together of different perspectives and people. But in parallel, we've been working towards other platforms as well. So there is this Urgent Pedagogics platform, which is run by Jaspis, which is kind of a governmental art agency in Sweden. They run this program called Urgent Pedagogics, where we ask to contribute. And there we, inspired by the work of primarily Clive Dilnot, we also started to reimagine, you know, if then design is the right, who is the designer? And somehow also, you know, came to, you know, reflect upon, you know, to what degree the professional demarcation of design somehow also might actually stop design from, you know, being design. Or so I read it out. What is then design? What is it then to design if you are not a designer? What is it to do design if you do not necessarily design things which have not yet come into being? Is it not the capacity to imaginatively and critically engage with anything as something, which systematically, through all sorts of potentialities and lost opportunities, have transcended from non-being to being? What if design is not only about utterance and authorship, as historically cultivated in formal design education, but about interpretation and readership as well? So what we kind of saw, this really comes from you know, a background as a design education. There's so much focus on, you know, on the making and the production of stuff and ideas, and especially new things, and which also gives a very, you know, narrow focus. And it also has to do, you know, who were able to enter this indication and what are the kind of knowledge used for. And we somehow saw that the capacity to read and interpret design is, you know, more important than ever today, you know, given the amount of stuff which is around us and the implications with it. So somehow we felt the kind of current focus on making rather than reading and understanding is problematic. And the kind of, there's always this kind of lament about the lost agency of architects and designers. And for us, it also has to do with the kind of the focus, you know, on the kind of professional aspects of being a designer and architect, for instance, rather than seeing it as a kind of broader subject, which should be, you know, placed and cultivated elsewhere. And there, not for the purpose of perhaps doing stuff, but really just understand stuff. And this also connects to, and there will be a workshop on this later in the fall. So now we talk about Arts Inside Out, which is a kind of ongoing residency program in the region of Halland. But we were invited to write a small piece for the journal in relation to residency. And this is also comes back to in Sweden, and there is this new national policy called Design for Living Environment, which is really mirrors, I mean, to a high degree, the new European Bauhaus policy, which you might have heard of or picked up upon. So we started to think about, you know, what could be done with these kind of policies, and what is the role of design, or, you know, even so public design. And in Sweden, there is this so-called 1% rule, which was, I think, was settled in the 40s, where it was decided that 1% of the building cost should be used for, you know, artworks in relation to the building. I mean, that was practiced as a rule quite extensively, you know, and still is on the national level, but it's not on a kind of used on, let's say, regional or municipal level, that extensively anymore. But for us, it was also kind of a point of departure to think about policies and political will and how changes come about. And we started speculating, what if one could imagine a 1% rule for public design, which then would, and this connects back to the question about literacy and readership, where the public could, be a proper stakeholder in, working towards development of our, built environment, which then folds back to question about education and where does education happen, not only within higher education, but how does subjects like architecture and design look if we talk about basic education and so forth. So somehow we just try to, get a kind of view on the whole kind of ecosystem of knowledge and knowledge production and knowledge exchange, and, to start to, question the way things are set up now. And I mean, the system is crumbling, I would say. So let's see. So, and in the lecture, I promised 2 fires as point of departures for reflection, and so I will go more into ideas or in relation perhaps more to building DigiCraft or questions around digitalization and craft and what that might mean. So we start, I've used 2 fires as conversation pieces for that. So this is a fire, quite recent one in Gothenburg on the north side in the area called Ringen. And no one was hurt. Was great, but the place which was burnt down to the ground was a place called Claessons Träskärra, which was the kind of main supplier of building material, not the ones you would find in the big retailers, but different kinds of oils and tars, primarily which were used by professional craftsmen, and all the kind of special items you would need for all sorts of repair and development and building in relation to built environment. And it's also, this particular company was also located in this area Ringen, which is actually an area where a lot of these kind of suppliers and services could be found. And a colleague she's also been at Chalmers but also at GU, Gabrielle Olshammer, picked, up these whole areas in relation to discussion. Nigel Trift as having around urban glue and the tying together of entire city to the ever continuing practices of caretaking, cleaning, and mending and repair. So just starting to focus on, where, what are the kind of sites and organizations and people and competences necessary for just keeping the city afloat. This is everything from, people who bring out, your garbage or work out the sewers or, repair the door and so forth. So all these things, and this comes back to the 99%. It's quite a lot of work, keeping the 99% running. And we do tend to forget about it. And sometimes it's just, it's so obvious, but that we forget about it is probably the most crucial things. And these are also the things we do realize in crisis, how these kind of simple things are really make a difference. So, and craft, of course, has a natural place there. It is a kind of a caretaking practice, I would say. It's not primarily about always making new stuff, but it's actually about taking care of stuff. And it's quite precise in its kind of ways, and also is very embodied. This is just to acknowledge that different ways this can be worked on. So this is a colleague also from Academy of Art and Design, Gustav Tain, who's a blacksmith. And he's also been obsessed with, the question of knowledge and embodied knowledge. And especially, in his eye is also the case that the number of blacksmiths are dwindling. So this is, you know, on being risk of being kind of heritage lost, so to say. And he's starting to work on, you know, with digital tools, of finding ways to actually document or reflect upon the knowledge produced through craft and with craft. So we have small clippets, and you could watch this. It's kind of video paper which you can watch.
Is what it looks like to forge.
Well, unfortunately, the video is not starting here.
You don't see it.
It's only one image. It's stuck up.
This is another way to forge.
Is it lagging then, maybe? You don't see anything.
We can only see the initial image, the blacksmith.
Way.
Try again then.
And the fourth way. There are many ways to forge. Drawing out, cutting off, scrolling, and bending.
We have a new try then. You see the web page now, or?
We can see only the image with the blacksmith working. It's frozen there. But you know what sometimes works? If you go out of the presenter mode, like from this view mode, and then go back to the one that you're using, sometimes then the video runs and we can actually see it out of experience. I know that this sometimes works.
You mean from the stop sharing, you mean?
No, not stop sharing, but because now we can see the presenter, not the presenter viewer, we can see the full screen presentation, and you have the presenter viewer in front of you, right? So if you share this one, the presenter viewer with us, usually from there, we are able to see the video. I cannot promise that it works, but quite often it's the case.
Maybe I should just... Do I need to share? Because I'm jumping into web page. Maybe that's... How do I change from the presenter view here? It is beyond my knowledge. I will just jump, and I will try to do it like this then. Oh, this one. Then I will share. Does it work now?
Yes, but is there a sound? Because we're not.
Yeah, it will come.
Okay.
This is what it looks like to forge. This is another way to forge. Third way. And the fourth way. There are many ways to forge. Drawing out, cutting off, scrolling, and bending, etc. The video recording allows us to see relatively fine nuances of the actions and movements embodied in a craft process. The various ways of working in a craft process are often referred to as techniques. For the next 20 minutes, techniques will be the focus. For techniques may be a key to spreading skills through a video format. Techniques may be a key to locate the tacit knowledge in a craft practice. I could tell you what it is to forge, but telling would not do justice to it. I'd have to show you. But if you don't already know what to know, you won't know what to look for when I show you. That I could tell you.
I won't go into detail about that, just to... No need to share. But I mean, it doesn't show it, but he's also working with, you know, marking up. So it's quite extensive work of, you know, understanding, you know, the body movements, you know, produced and, you know, reflecting upon that. There's a video here as well, but I won't click it. There's another approach where they, you know, reconstruct an old church, use VR models to do that, and also think of the layers, and also add, I mean, all sorts of information related to the building. So it becomes kind of a more extensive way of understanding this historical building. It's going to använda Keynote Discussion. And this maybe should show. So one of the workshops I mentioned, we worked with in relation to this ongoing residency, Arts Inside Out, was in Eskilsby, which is one of the few villages in Sweden which, you know, haven't changed. There was a huge land reform in Sweden, where more or less all the villages, you know, were, you know, replanned in relation to the land rather than being concentrated in the way we see here. So a set of artists and craftsmen were invited to, you know, work with this site. Then I will try actually to show a short video there as well. Do this. I will try once again to play it through this, see if it works. I also have to do it the other way around. Do you see anything now moving?
Unfortunately not.
Okay, I will just, because I see you also running out of time. So this Cora Landsma, she worked with felt in relation to the surrounding pastures as a way of mapping things out, and also engaging with the farmers in this area to, you know, gain knowledge about this as a kind of historical site. I will try to show you a bit at least. Sorry for the. I will do it like this. Now you see, right?
This is a kind of experiment for me, this
Yes.
sound, adding sound to my work. I have the experience that every time when I make an exhibition or making my work, people are really into the feeling and touching of my work. And they can't resist the softness of it. My goal is to connect people with landscape by making my own landscapes. So in this, for the first time in this project, I want to find out what I can do with this touch. And I can.
Let's show the clip from this one.
collecting of data is the starting point for doing my research as a landscape researcher. I'm working with data, so not with a feeling of something I want or a concept. I want to see what's there, and so I for myself, when I walked these lines using my GPS, collecting my own tracks, I saw that the stones were put in different ways. Not each stone was settled in this environment. This kind of micro relief in landscape is hardly visible, and the surface. In the surface of landscape, there is so much story hidden, and yes, this is kind of new discovering of your environment. Yeah.
Okay, again, so this attentiveness or one-to-oneness, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, kind of focus. So, and this is another fire which you all know about, I would guess, the fire in Grenfell Towers, starting in a refrigerator, then, the fire catching on to the panels, which, weren't, sufficiently, checked or designed, for fireproof and all sorts of things. And I mean, it's interesting, and I will talk more about that. I mean, it's also, again, if we talk about the 99%, I mean, the reason, I mean, it did caught fire is also, a lot of the 99% is really out of focus anyway. I mean, this is just houses who no one really cares for. But in relation to craft and data, I think it's interesting the work, forensic architecture, which you might have known or know as well, I've been doing in relation to this. And they have a kind of interesting methodology where they differentiate between, first of all, how they have this kind of forensic approach, but they differentiate between, I have to do it like this, what they call the field of investigation, and what they call the forum, which I will come to. So, and for me, this is also one way of thinking about craft, or that attentiveness to details, or staying with the small things and the important details in our relations and in materiality. So this is some documentation around what they've been doing. I mean, I have a range of, let's say, similar projects which you can find on the website, but really interesting. So, and then the idea, of course, in their case is the idea of the 4-hour forum, So if the field is the way where, you draw out evidence or construct, the 4-hour forum is the, the place where those, evidences are presented and discussed, to make change. I think that is a kind of a interesting, to frame it that way, also as a kind of methodology. We tend to focus on the field and what data to draw out, but what are the for us, which are there to make a difference, and how are they kind of incorporated into the kind of overall process. This is another take, a colleague also, Ronny Martinsson. I mean, he has a kind of, in a way, a similar approach, but he's addressing climate change, and he's a photographer, and for the past 15 years he's been doing work where he revisits sites, historical sites, so to say, where where explorers in the around the 1870s and onwards, documented Arctic, and just revisits them and try to reconstruct or take images or photographs from the same sites, as to trace impact on climate change. And here you see the decline of glacier in the area, based on drawings from the 1818 and 1861, and the images produced now. And it's again a way of creating visibility and awareness, and possibly also kind of political momentum around these things. I have a link there, but I won't go there. So again, back to the what's there. So the image I showed you before is from Linnestaden and Mastorget, a quite kind of mixed and interesting part of the city, with well-designed architecture from different ages. But again, I mean, the bulk of a lot of our built environments look quite different. They're built in a few years, in a similar typology. And so this is Biskopsgården, and these are very different areas, not only spatial, but of course also socially and culturally and so forth. And this is just some kind of statistics, also to remind us, where are our focus and how are these things played out. So the left side is Linnestaden, the first image, and Biskopsgården on the right side, the second image. I mean, approximately the same amount of people. In Linnestaden, I mean, the number of people born outside Sweden is 13%, and in the Biskopsgården it's 38%. The average income in Linnestaden is 263,400, and in Biskopsgården it's 180,000, significantly less. The number of families with family support is 3% in Linnestaden and 12% in Biskopsgården, and unemployment 2.5 in Linnestaden and 5.0 in Biskopsgården. The number of buildings built in between 71 and 80, 25.9, and in Biskopsgården is 0.4. I mean, all the buildings were built in between the 50s and late 60s. And this last column or row is about the ownership owned by the city. In Linnestaden is 13%, and in the Biskopsgården it's 45%. So for me, this is kind of a reminder, of course, buildings are buildings, but the kind of care and intentions and, political momentum, of course, are related to this kind of demographics. So spaces are not just spaces, but they also, carry a certain kind of orientation. I mean, then we have this new, I think many cities do have this kind of digital twins. So the kind of question I've been returning to is, I mean, usually we discuss the digital twin, of course, as a way to, develop things, and it's about implementing future projects. But for me, it is really interesting to think about it in relation to the 99%, or perhaps even more in relation to the let's say 95% of the building stock, which really is out of focus. How could that be used? And here, and coming to the end now, I return to this kind of idea about public design, and this is something we discussed in the what if 1% rule, is the idea of a kind of public design service similar to jury duty. And here one can think of, and this is a kind of summary of the things presented, to the forensic architecture, but also the kind of knowledge of buildings or built environments and craft presented in crafts. Could this kind of digital twins, be thought of as kind of repository for engaging with those things, and could that then be paired, with the kind of broader knowledge of design knowledge or knowledge about architecture, which in turn would enable a different kind of interaction in between, the public and our built environment. So I think there are huge possibilities actually to think of these digital twins as democratic tools, if that is paired with, a revision or us to revisit the role of education and higher education with regard to these issues. So, and these are the things, this is very loose, and in a way, one can question the feasibility of it, but it is a kind of driving vision which we try to look at now. And this returns, so I got this image, representing your project, the Baukultur, pinpointing process, material knowledge, values, tools, and skills. And I was also asked to somehow pose questions, but for me, I just come back to see here. Yeah, I should say something about the notion of orientation. There's this queer scholar, Sarah Ahmed. And I mean, her research starts off from the fact that she's a Black scholar, and she's lesbian, and she's, has been working at Goldsmiths and other universities, which she just talks about the experience of, entering a boardroom, all white, all male, and being who she is. And what does that do to her? What role does play, her body play and her appearance, and what role does the setting say? And her point is, our spaces and our ideas, they are oriented towards something. There is a kind of, it is not groundbreaking, but I think it's an interesting take. They are, in a sense, normative, and there are deviations from it. And being normative also allows you not to think about the way you are normative. So it's also a way of questioning, what are kind of peripheries and what are relations produced, in the outskirts. And I think it's actually, and this is also the former side, is also to think of how are we actually oriented, or how is the landscape we operate oriented, and is this actually the kind of orientation that we strive for? And this goes back to a very broad question, but in relation to this seemingly self-evident nomenclature about process, knowledge, material, and values and skills, what is the orientation of your work? What change are you trying to produce, and what are the kind of components? So for me, the questions will be which processes and what values, what materials and which tools, what knowledge and what skills. And not to take any of these for granted just because they somehow fit into the picture, but really question the use of them. I think that is the last one.
Thank you so much, Henric. Very interesting speech presentation. And thank you very much for the rich also content. It's so much what happened today. And I have many thoughts, many questions, and I will start maybe with something that you said very recently about the peripheries. What are the peripheries in relation to craftsmanship, to knowledge we gain from actually what already happened in cities? So what are the peripheries?
you can read it, of course, on many layers. I mean, you can read this from an individual point of view, right? And there you have a certain predeposit language is, of course, one. You know, what does language allow you to do or not? What are hard to express? And I think this is the kind of question of tacit knowledge, for instance. But it also in terms of, you know, who do you associate with? You know, who do you partner up with? And it's, I mean, in Swedish there is this proverb called "kaka söker maka." You somehow, you know, seek up the people who are similar to yourself, right? So you know, rather than pushing your periphery, you know, you stay within your comfort zone. So I think, and that happens on the individual level. It also happens on the institution, of course. And I think to be mindful of the way we, let's say, reproduce a normative orientation, right? There will always be peripheries. I mean, there's no way about being idealistic and saying, you know, that we are all equal and so forth. But I mean, just to be mindful of that kind of, you know, exchange and game, and especially since we are, you know, we have unequal access, you know, to education or knowledge or welfare and so forth, and that you know, that's something. I think it's more about the reflection on, you know, what are the things I take for granted, you know, as a researcher or an educator or as being part of an institution, and what are the things in the periphery which I don't really see. And for doing this, we need others, right? And I think there is this kind of brilliant quote, and he's an author, was also based on Gunnar D. Hansson, and he used to say, so what we're trying to, you know, teach our students, and this was within literary composition, is to be able to read their text as if they were someone else, right? So language is also so intimate, so we don't really see, you know, how our own interpretation of things, you know, somehow overrules the ways it could be read otherwise. So it's really, I think, about engaging with other perceptions and other ideas around our own work, because we don't see the periphery, we just see the center. And you can scale that up or scale it down, but that's a kind of principal question. I don't know if that was the response.
Point. Yes, it's a very good point. I noted also very from during your lecture, your title of the lecture is on situated knowing, digitalization and to burning buildings. But this on the situated knowing, you also said caretaking practice, craftsmanship is a caretaking practice. I really like this. And still, I would say you mentioned a lot about transdisciplinarity. So if we want to know, and we don't want to forget about, you said existing stock is 99%. What is this that we really need to, promote very much? How would you?
No, I mean, I think
very synthetic way.
Maybe this, and I think this, I didn't say more about it specifically, but I think it runs like a thread into the example, is knowledge production is situated. It does matter where you are, who you are, you know, with what eyes look upon an environment. All these things matters. And I think my own experience is also that, you know, being at the site, talking about the site, allows a different kind of transdisciplinarity, because there are more ways to engage with the site rather than to, let's say, representations or drawing or presentations. So I would say being site-specific, you know, enhances the possibility of doing transdisciplinary work, because there are more points of entry, so to say, and more points of conversation. I mean, it becomes also more unruly, but that's the kind of fun part, I would say. So for me, there is this kind of connectedness between, you know, being situated, being on site, you know, doing transdisciplinary work. It's very hard to do it, you know, in an abstract way, because then you lose the meaning making and you don't have a kind of shared experience to start from. So I think that's also, in terms of methodology, it's also about creating this kind of shared experience where you can allow different viewpoints and, you know, different kind of discussions. And that usually, you know, gets lost in translation if you are, for instance, on Zoom, or if you do all this kind of representation. but there's always someone who, you know, already interpreted what is there and point at the actual meaning rather than, you know, the thing in itself. So I think that's been a kind of ongoing, I mean, both with the right to design and the criticity to just try to place things where they are, where they can be, you know, contested, and where there are no, you know, privileged position to say, or primary interpretation.
Thank you so much. I think this really adding a lot to the whole week and the whole discussions and work done. We probably should give some space for questions. Emilia, you have the outlook.
Well, I would like one more time to invite participants to ask their questions. As you know, you can raise your hand, we can give you the word, or just use the questions and answer section. At the moment, I cannot see raised hands. But please feel free, because Henric is here staying a couple of more minutes.
Yeah, so maybe if there are no questions, if I could ask also, because you've asked about the perspectives, the orientation at the end of your lecture. So thank you for your input to the whole workshop, not only for today, because I really love this changing perspective in your lecture, because you've asked about the orientation, but I think I try to read it as a point of view, as a perspective which we are observing the world, and he offers us a vision which is like slow life. This is caretaking, this detailed, carefully, this detailed. Careful observation with the notion of the details, and I think this is something which is very important. And my question is, how do you are you optimistic about us as a society? Because now we are living, like, more than half of the population, we are living in the city, in a quick life, with no connection to the landscape. You mentioned in your lecture this careful observation of the landscape, sensitiveness to the landscape, and connecting people with the landscape, which is probably also the part of the pedagogy which you mentioned. And you've mentioned the lost opportunities. How can you reflect on this? Are we in the situation when we should special kind of training in observing details also in this cultural landscape, not only the natural landscape? How much effort should we put to change this perspective in general, not only in your professional perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I mean, it's in a way, I'm both optimistic and not so optimistic, because I mean, it's a lot of problems. I mean, because a lot of things we deal with or I address are in a way reactive. It is a kind of response to the way learning, let's say, is set up, right? And I mean, there are a lot of merits, to the model we have, and specialization. But I mean, it also, puts us at certain places. So, and this model won't change overnight. Still, I think there are quite a lot of work at many places, also, especially outside academy, which are doing this work. So I think, being optimistic, the best we can do is of course to support that and try to, open up conversations, in between these, more privileged knowledge regimes and other ways of approaching things. I mean, but I mean, it's so embedded in, economics and politics and, the education market and research funding and this kind of things. So these things happen, but they do happen very slowly. Then again, I think things do happen, maybe not as quick as we hope for. I mean, I remember, my own education as an architect in the late 80s and early 90s. I mean, there were no kind of concerns whatsoever about, I would say, social issues or sustainability. It was just to kind of focus on, having, nice designs and using natural materials, but there was no kind of added layer or reflections. And I mean, again, this is almost like 20, 30 years ago. But these are the kind of time spans of what we talk about when you talk about the systems. Also, I mean, if you talk about art and design, the notion of research in the formal matter, I mean, has only existed for like maximum 20 years or 15 years, and you know, so they're all, the kind of time thing is frustrating. And working at academy, you see, of course, changes do happen, but they happen too slowly, and it's kind of frustrating. But I think, I mean, I also colleagues, and in the book I mentioned about the university heritage, one colleague, on by Martins, really talks about the crucial role of the universities in, you know, reorienting, you know, the professional, let's say, attitude towards built environment. In her case, she discusses a case in Gothenburg, Haga, which was a huge area built, you know, in the late, around the 1850s or so, which were, you know, on the rink of being torn down in the 70s, but which met a lot of resistance among architects, especially architects at the Chalmers, the school Anna is located. So the kind of political momentum and the knowledge about historical buildings was really developed, and the academy, or Chalmers in this case, was really crucial for changing that kind of attitude towards built environment. And this has had an impact on education ever since. So there is this kind of, you know, time issue, you know, what are the ideas we talk about now, and there is a kind of emergency to doing educational research which changes things now. But at the end of the day, I think the big kind of impact of what we're talking about today is really the students who, you know, participate in these discussions and PhDs, who eventually in 5 or 10 or 15 years will do our work, you know, in institutions or in offices or municipalities with a quite different mindsets than the people like us who are there today. And this might be too slow to, you know, make the changes, you know, which are, you know, necessary. And so there's a kind of urgency to it. And yeah.
No,
thank you, Henric.
Sorry. I wanted only to say thank you for your that you opened our eyes to this problematic. I think this is key important in our life nowadays.
Thank you so much, Bartoszek. So we had Günther, you raised your hand. We have also one question in the chat.
Yes. Maybe first Chris, because he was the first one to ask his question. Chris, would you like to ask a question yourself? I can give you the word if you want.
Yeah, sure, I can do so. Thanks. And also thanks a lot for the presentation. It was really insightful and interesting to listen to. And I was writing it down in the chat if you want to read it as well. So following a description of a researcher called Word, he described the essence of a society as its members' capacity to create a collective understanding, to perform towards a common goal, to common goals under agreed norms. And I was thinking, or basically your presentation reminded me of that. And then I was thinking, could you elaborate a little more following this description on the role of digitalization, but also especially this digital twin for the craftsman in future? Maybe I keep it here.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, I just see how things could, let's say, coincide, or there could be a momentum built around, let's say, digital twin, not only as a kind of a professional tool, but as you say, to building a kind of more societal understanding of built environment. But then it comes back to, you know, how is this kind of, let's say, norm or understanding, you know, produced throughout society? And then we come back to the notion of education. And if we are somehow to move beyond the notion of, you know, that this is a concern only professionals, but for, you know, citizens in general, I mean, these are questions which should be addressed or picked up, you know, in basic education. So there is this, I would say, this kind of interplay between, you know, professional knowledge and general knowledge. And I think one of the main challenges is actually that, you know, that they are, you know, they are not, you know, connected enough, right? And this is, I mean, a lot of discussions about them. And it comes back to questions about education, you know, if there are to be a kind of informed discussion around these things, and of course you cannot be as informed as a citizen, you know, only partaking in these issues in terms of basic education, but it needs to be on the agenda. And I think digital twin could possibly provide such a kind of entry point for education, but also change making practices on all kinds of levels. But then it needs to move out of the it's primarily a professional focus, but to be thought of as a kind of a public infrastructure, right, as the city itself. Which I think they're hinting at that, but I think it's a huge task. But it also needs to be paired to, let's say, infrastructures and support systems outside the digital twin itself, right? It also requires changes in education, for instance.
Thank you so much. Can we ask Günther to ask the question?
Hello, everybody. Hello, Henric. Thanks for this talk, and which was very different to what we heard so far. I have a very short question, actually. Actually, I liked one aspect very much, this statement of the right to design and the right to research, which is kind of like promoting a democratic approach to these things, which are usually very exclusive. On the other hand, you mentioned, and I have read from the homepage, that you are involved in this project of kind of curating the city, which is a kind of active part from your side, or from your kind of like community of researchers and artists and so on. So the question is, what are your KPIs? So what are your feedback loops in your activation, like in your actively changing, obviously, the city or influencing the city? So what's your KPIs there?
No, but I mean, I think especially with the curating city, and I would say I mentioned these hidden sites like this, they are really embedded activities where we from the start set up activities with the municipality or other stakeholders. What should be done, how could it be done, what's the short time effect, or what are the kind of long-term goals for doing that. So I think it's also about not so much about having a question and trying to find a context for it, but starting somewhere with someone and together identifying what should be done and how it could be worked out. So it's really about open up the process as early as possible. But then of course it relies on being able to establish a conversation, being able to hear what other people are actually saying and interested in, rather than projecting your own ideas. So it is a kind of a a time-consuming process. But the good thing is, of course, that if you put time and effort into this, the conversations will go on. So I think with hidden sites, I mean, the number of kind of partnerships which we return to, since the conversations seem to work and the work we do have an impact on whatever they try to do. But I mean, I would say it's really kind of a organic approach. So that's one way. And with the right to design, I think it is on a slightly early stage, but we are more on the phase of actually we have produced a kind of series of statements which are also kind of drawn attraction, and we're starting to build activities with partners around, for instance, this kind of what if rule, what is the public design, and we will do a live playing workshop also within this art inside out in the fall, for instance. So we it's a kind of combination of putting yourself on stage by stating things or having ideas and prompting ideas, but also allow to them to be reinterpreted or be situated elsewhere, and push your own imaginary around it. So I think what we really want to do is, or what we do is, we invest in relationships, right, with people outside the academy. I think this is also based on an observation that, I mean, it goes down to, of course, what kind of employment you are. So I have a fixed contract, so I can work, within a certain kind of time frame. And I think that's also important part, aspect when you talk about partnerships, to actually have a sense of what are kind of circumstances you operate from. I mean, many people only have part-time contracts. And if you talk about participation, I mean, the general rule is, of course, that you're not paid at all. You're just supposed to participate as a citizen. So these kind of asymmetries is really also something which should be, voiced in these conversations, and they would, hamper any kind of, success if not addressed.
Thank you so much. I would say I see a lot that we say in your work and in the projects you presented and the attitude. I see a lot that the projects are shaping a way to give something back to the community. And we already, I think, could learn that it's a lot happening in this giving back some signals, what is really the right. And thank you for this. And I think that we should really probably move on to the discussion part. Are there more questions? Something, Emilia?
At the moment, I don't see further questions. Maybe if one last call, if you would like to ask your questions, please feel free to do so now. Otherwise, I just wanted to make a comment that I also enjoyed your lecture very much. And for me, it was quite insightful to learn about the forensic architecture project, because I really think it's a very good initiative, and definitely I'm going to investigate deeper into it. The fact that you can actually collect all this data, what we've been discussing all through the workshop, that we have this data, but to bring it really from all around the world, or people who were actually there at the moment when it was happening, to bring this information together and offer it to the public, to actually to draw their own conclusions and to be able to work with this information, I think is really a huge step forward. And maybe there is something for the future with this initiative.
Thank you, Maria. I think this is also a good point, and the point that somehow I really enjoyed this perspective from your lecture about this breaking the silos thinking, and also discipline thinking, that we very often used to speak, work, act as just the discipline requires, but actually a little bit thinking out of the box, it's a big profit. So I think your also work is showing this, taking new questions, new way of looking at things. And I think this is maybe also the future when we think about combining a new way of doing craftsmanship, new way of combining digitalization to our everyday life. So also it's a little bit looking with different eyes to things. So I think this was also a huge, I would say, pleasure for me to look at your material you presented today. That should be no fear to look at others, what they do, maybe having the similar questions.
I mean, you get far by just being able to be curious about things, and to allow yourself to say, I don't know anything about this, the kind of not knowing. And I think especially in academia, there's of course anxiety about not knowing or saying the wrong thing, so I think we also need to move past that, because that kind of anxiety, that is just reactive. That's just a kind of system response, which is really, stopping us from doing what should be done.
Thank you so much.